Let me know when we're ready to go.
Mr. Mayor, we are live streaming. Go ahead.
Sorry, I can't hear you.
We are live streaming.
Council meeting, is it urgent or can I call you back?
Hang on, I just got to get some volume there. We are. Okay, well, welcome to the Official Plan Update Committee agenda for Tuesday, November the 24th at 1:30 p.m. Thank you all. And this is an electronic meeting pursuant to section 2383.3 of the Municipal Act of 2001. We have before us, it will come forward as we know. So can I have a motion to adopt the agenda as it is before us, please? Councillor Chan and Councillor West, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Any disclosures of pecuniary interest and the general nature thereof of members of council? Seeing none. Mr. Clerk. Also, next we have the minutes of the previous meeting, which was February 25th. Wow. I have a mover and seconder for the previous minutes. Councillor West and Councillor Silovitz. Any comments anyway? Seeing none. Okay, our next item is our scheduled. Yes. I'm looking for Mr. Kwan. Sorry, Calvin, are you? I haven't noticed here that for introduction. Might introduce you or you introduce somebody else.
You can introduce me and I'll do the rest.
Okay. Commissioner Kwan, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Welcome, everybody. I appreciate you joining us this afternoon. This is a resumption of the Official Plan Update Committee meeting or committee project. It would behoove me, obviously, to not mention the impact that COVID has had on the overall project in terms of the consultation piece. I do want to reassure the committee, however, that staff in the interim have been working diligently on doing background work and putting together the necessary pieces to inform us going forward on the plan. But we are also working with the objective of still completing the plan before this term of council is complete. So I'd just like to, I have a number of slides to go through just to give you some refresher memories as to where we are. And I'd just like to start off by talking about today's meeting. I will provide some information about the key messages that we've heard from the committee when we last met in February. I will then introduce the newest member. Sorry, Ryan, next slide, please. I'll then introduce the newest member of our OP update team, our urbanist visionary, Mr. David Dixon. We'll then pause for some Q&A with David. I'm sure he'll have some enlightening things to say, which everybody will want to jump in on. We'll then have Sibel Van Kersel provide a timeline update as to the next steps, and then we'll have any closing remarks. And hopefully some confirmation by the committee that we're on track and ready to go. Next slide, please. So as I just mentioned, at the end of today's meeting, we're hoping that we can hear from the committee and receive your confirmation that we are moving in the right direction for undertaking the update to the official plan. We would like to hear your thoughts with respect to the information you'll be hearing from David and staff today, and intend on working with this feedback to develop the vision for the updated OP that will resonate with council and the general public. Next slide, please. If you recall, at the initial OPUC meeting in February, we heard 4 key messages from the committee. The first is that we need to understand the lessons learned from our last OP. Second, we should consider the city as the downtown of York Region, with the Richmond Hill Center as the key growth area, hopefully with the advent of some formal announcements on the arrival of the subway. Thirdly, we should promote and enhance our special places. And fourthly, we should consider hiring a visionary to provide fresh perspectives on how we achieve our 2041 plan. Next slide, please. With respect to the lessons we learned from the last OP, we took a hard look at how the OP has worked over the last 10 years. While we have experienced growth in our communities and have some noteworthy development from both the public and private sectors, such as award-winning parks, a new library, new office and industrial development in our business parks, and several new high-rise developments along the Yonge Street corridor, we do acknowledge that our OP policies have been too prescriptive. We need to be more visionary to facilitate various development conditions and scenarios. As we have all recognized, planning is a very dynamic process, and we need to be able to pivot very quickly when new projects come on board. Moreover, we find that we need to implement new policy direction from the province and an emerging regional policy direction. A greater diversity of uses and achieving density are necessary to support the substantial transit investment in our city and the region. There's also a need for a greater emphasis on the fostering of a successful local economy. The city's growth is improving. The city's employment growth is improving, but we still must advocate for mixed-use development projects along our corridors, which provide for a better balance of jobs and people. We also need to build a great city through partnerships. The city needs to take more initiative to build and foster partnerships to achieve the vision that it has to be more prominent and in the region and the GTA. Partnerships may involve different stakeholders from the senior levels of government to the land development industry, and of course, our current and future residents and businesses of Richmond Hill. Last but not least, one of the key suggestions from the committee was to seek the advice of a visionary. Mr. David Dixon is that person, and I'm very pleased to have him with us today. David is the principal in charge of planning and urban design at Stantec Consulting's Urban Places Group, operating out of Boston, Massachusetts. In recent years, he's led planning in post-Katrina New Orleans, transformed strip malls into new suburban downtowns in many municipalities throughout North America, and initiated a broad reappraisal of the role of density in building a more livable, resilient, and equitable communities. His Canadian experience includes being a keynote speaker at a city building conference in Quebec City last year, and is currently working in Canada with the City of Ottawa on a project very similar to ours. David is a sought-after expert in urban planning and design, and is well known for helping to create new mixed-use urban districts and the planning, revitalization, and redevelopment of downtowns. David's impact, however, has not gone unnoticed. He's won dozens of awards from many organizations like the American Institute of Architects, the American Planning Association, the Congress for New Urbanism, and the International Downtown Association. As a fellow of the American Institute of Architects, David was honored with their Thomas Jefferson Medal for a lifetime of creating livable neighborhoods, vibrant civic spaces, and vital downtowns. Residential Architecture magazine has also named David to their Hall of Fame as, I quote, "the person we call to ask about our cities," end quote. I believe the insight that David will be sharing with us today and the months to come will provide us with a fresh perspective on what we need to think about, what it means for our city to be the downtown of York Region, and to help us identify special places that we want to embrace and nurture over the long term. So David, I hope I've not embarrassed you too much, but without further ado, I will turn the meeting over to you, and David will share his preliminary thoughts and ideas on how we can plan the city of Richmond Hill for the 21st century. David, welcome aboard.
Thank you, Kelvin, very much. I should say I deeply appreciate your overly generous introduction, which I suspect my office provided. For all of you who are wondering, if you want to do a lot of things in life, just get old and they happen. So I am really excited actually to have this chance to talk to all of you. It's a luxury to fly into a place mentally, have terrific folks like Sibel and Patrick and Kelvin try to give me enough of a lay of the land to really not speak like a local, but apply my broad thoughts. But I'm still up at 50,000 feet. And I also don't want this to sound like a long and dull lecture, or to be one for that matter. So please, if you have a question, just jump in. This is meant to support you in your terrific efforts, and nothing more or less. So if you've got something in your mind and I'm off someplace else, just stop and ask me. So, and I want to emphasize that in my mind, we're talking about actually a plan that is happening at exactly the right time. I was interviewed recently about another downtown plan I did 10 years ago, and it's been very successful. And somebody said, why? And I said, because we did it at the right time. We did it at a time when downtowns were entering a period of renaissance. Well, you are doing this plan to me at an extraordinarily right time for the kind of community you are, given the kinds of changes that I'm going to talk about and the opportunities they create. So hence a new era of opportunity. Next, please. So I love to always remember that not just we as people, but the places we live have histories. This was Richmond Hill at one point, the radial line. Next, please. I hope the Palmer House is still there. Richmond Hill today, clearly a large and bustling place that has grown continually. Next, please. And what is actually much more important is the ability to dive down to the really special places there are in Richmond Hill. There's just a great deal to build on that wouldn't be visible in that aerial photograph. Next, please, in terms of a community that really has its own identity and is well on its way to becoming a downtown for York Region, very much a place on its own. And that's to me what the City Plan 2041 is about. You've had many chapters. This is about writing the next. And in my mind, writing the next chapter appropriately, this is for me to say, starts with understanding what is the context for writing this chapter. And next, please. And I love to go back to a community I did a lot of work with, Dublin, Ohio. Dublin is one of the most affluent suburbs in the US Midwest. It's outside of Columbus, Ohio. It had done a very nice job of either stealing or attracting, depending on what your perspective was, much of the Class A office space out of Dublin, Ohio in the 1980s and 90s into beautifully landscaped office parks. And when this photograph was taken, this was a photo of success. They had a series of wonderful golf courses and lots of very expensive houses surrounding them. Fast forward. I started working in Dublin in the early 2000s because they had brought in a new city manager who said, this is not the future of a successful suburb or community. We are aging. Our workforce is increasingly about knowledge workers who are not terribly interested in living next to a golf course. We need to create a downtown if we're going to, before 2000, Dublin made every top 10 list you could imagine. If we're going to keep making those lists, we need to create a really vibrant downtown that is not just the economic center of our community, not just the amenity center, but the heart, a place everyone can identify with. They have done that. It's called Bridge Park. We had the pleasure and honor of doing the planning. Next, please. And Dublin is right back up there for very different reasons, ranked as a top place to live. One thing that I want to emphasize is that the changes in Dublin, the new downtown, the reinforcing of a traditional sort of village center, the creation of a great deal of what I'll use the term walkable density sufficient to get people out walking around, support retail, et cetera. didn't change a blade of grass on any of those golf courses or front lawns that you saw a minute ago. And one reason the community became so enthusiastic about supporting this is they saw it as not a replacement of the lives they'd chosen, but a net add that enriched their changing lives. Next, please. So, and this is because I said they're changing lives. We are all changing. Our world is changing. And that's what I want to spend a lot of my time talking about. And once again, please ask questions, because it's what most matters is this is relevant to you. So we'll start with demographics. But before that, a word about COVID. And I realized I wish I had a picture of a man and a woman both working at home. This looks a little sexist, but it's the one I found. And I say this because we are surrounded, enmeshed. We are living in a world of COVID, of worldwide pandemic right now, which has made is bringing about many changes. People are much more interested in green cities, places to walk. Every great community I know of is out there licensing every restaurant possible to serve outside along sidewalks, and that's creating a wonderful sense of community, particularly in urban neighborhoods that people treasure and don't want to lose. Tremendous advocacy for more bike lanes, as people say, we want complete streets, not vehicular streets, et cetera. And these are all qualities very much worth holding on to. But there are fundamental dynamics that were reshaping our society, our communities, long before COVID appeared, next please, that are fully in place. And the first starts with what's happening to our demographics. And this is really, in my mind, the source of the opportunity we face. And next please. So, when I was a kid, and none of you, I doubt, will recognize any of these folks here, but if I turned on the television, this is what the world looked like to me. Lots of kids. One of the adults in the family was actually paid for the work they did. And for these households, moving out to a suburb made a great deal of sense. For these same households, it probably still makes a great deal of sense in many cases. Next, please. Oh, and everybody was happy. Okay. If we look at media today, we see a very different picture of ourselves. Much more diverse, clearly, in ways we hadn't even imagined we could be diverse. And you will know, frankly, that these photos don't all have kids in them. In fact, and this is probably the most significant thing I'm going to say today, so you can just, no, don't turn off after this, but probably most consequential for Richmond Hill and many communities is that for the next 2 decades, the very large majority, I don't know the data for GTA yet, I will, but in many parts of the US, it's 80+% of net new households for the next 20 years, 2 decades, are going to be singles and couples. They are not choosing the same houses that Wally Beaver's family chose. They're even in the 1950s, households without kids were much more interested in urban living. That traditionally they have sought places that are walkable, amenity rich, and particularly community rich, and supported by densities that provide those qualities as places to live. And now, and when 80+% of net new households are singles and couples, that is the housing market. It had been dominated by households with kids for many years. That was a very different housing market that built a very different North America. But going forward, this is our market, and our housing market is 2/3 of our real estate economy. And frankly, probably coming out of COVID, maybe even represents a larger share. But next, please. One of the impacts as net new households are moving increasingly to urban places, an awful lot of folks bought houses in the suburbs from who lived there today, probably 1970 to 2000, a very large share. Suburbs have a more rapidly aging population than the rest of us. I don't know what the data is for the GTA. I do know that the York region, for example, is aging faster than Toronto. There are all kinds of implications for this. In fact, I could lose the whole hour, but I promise I won't. One is that these are folks who get more and more resistant to paying higher real estate taxes because they increasingly are on fixed incomes. I've sat, I can't tell you how many council meetings where people are standing up and saying, I don't want a new community center. I don't want a new community pool. I don't want a new park. I don't want my real estate taxes to go up. The reality is that as our communities age, it's very important to find to build other sources of tax base. To some extent, that's commercial, but to a very large extent, it is about inviting the new population in that creates a great deal of value. For example, along Yonge Street. And of course, 70+% of folks over 65, we all know polls are a little suspect right now, but basically said that they would like to move someplace in the next 5 years, and they want it to be actually probably many of them prefer rental, but owner occupied is okay too, but someplace that involves no maintenance and a chance to walk and places to walk to, and think of a large segment of our more urban market. Next, please. So what we have basically across North America is the green bar are the share of households who are singles and couples in 1970, 2015, 2025. The sort of very pale blue, light blue is single parents with children, and the orange, two parents with kids, households with two parents and kids. Single parents with kids and adults and singles on balance prefer more urban. And by urban, I don't mean city, I mean places that are walkable, have a main street nearby, hopefully within a 5-minute walk, provide a variety of housing choices, the things that you can all imagine. So that's very interesting. It's even more interesting than when you look at Canada's. I will get more data, but the US actually more than 60% of our housing is single family suburban, freestanding suburban. Canada 54%, but basically more than going forward, roughly 80% of the housing market will be looking for, in your case, a little over, for less than 50% of the housing supply. And now imagine the demand, the opportunity that housing can become as a tool that you can use to achieve the kinds of policies and goals you have, that are in a way that's market driven. The market is strong and will grow steadily stronger for 2 decades. Next, please. So this is an opportunity. Luckily, there's a lot of synergy with what I call the urban imperative. And next, please. And this has to do with, surprise, surprise, when folks start having fewer kids, eventually our labor force starts to grow a lot more slowly. And in 2010, it was growing less than 50% as fast as it had, in 2012, as it had in 2010. In 2040, it will still be growing. This is across North America, still be growing, even with Canada's immigration, still be growing more slowly than it did in 2010. Next, please. As this might suggest, let me add one more fact to really drive this home. For the next 20 years, and this takes a while to digest, it certainly took me a while to get used to, roughly 90% or more of net new jobs, remember it's just net new, not all new jobs, net new jobs will require some degree of higher education, at least probably 2 years or more. Not long from now, probably 4 years or more. A majority of manufacturing jobs today, for the first time in our history, require some college, and that's headed towards 4 years because increasingly it's automated. So what this means is, if you look at the chart on your left, that dark blue bar that says 16 to 18, across, this is not a US issue, a Canadian, a North American issue, a Canadian issue. This is a developed world issue. There is a significant shortage today, growing much more serious, much more stringent, of the kinds of skilled workers that are most in demand by our economy. This is creating tremendous competition, city to city, but particularly think of this as region to region in terms of attracting, the term is used, is talent. Basically an educated workforce, because basically it is labor supply that constrains knowledge industries. And since knowledge industries represent most of our growth, it is labor supply that constrains or not growth. If you want to attract jobs and investment, you start with talent these days. This is the work we're doing with the folks at Kanata North outside of Ottawa, which is Canada's arguably largest innovation cluster there. This is, now, if you look at who likes to live where, it turns out that college educated 26 to 49-year-olds, but this actually goes right up to ancient folks like me, who have 4 years or more of college, are moving into urban cores. They prefer urban cores. People with less than 4 years of education are moving out. Not necessarily because they want to move out, but they're getting priced out because education currently increasingly correlates with income. Now, this I know sounds immensely elitist at the moment, and I will add that knowledge industries are also the best way, by far more efficient than any other means, to create the full spectrum of jobs. We've done some work recently with the city of Buffalo, which projects that each knowledge industry job can create roughly 5 other jobs across the city of Buffalo for folks with a wide range of skills. So it is critical no matter how one looks at it. And next, please. And let's come back to where those kids want to live. This is a cartoon we've been using a lot in our conversations with Kanata North. This is from the Wall Street Journal's an article called "The Joys of Urban Tech." Goodbye office parks. Basically, it is cities far more than suburbs, but actually more than, increasingly not so much cities, urban places, walkable, mixed use, lively, fun, coffee, beer, all within a 5-minute walk, the ability to walk 5 minutes from where you live to where you work, that are attracting far more jobs and investment than particularly suburban office parks, but areas even in cities that lack that diversity, that variety, that mixed use, that sort of amenity value, the fun. Fun is economic development. So if you look, and this is just as a broad indicator, and this is US data, but I doubt it differs from Canada, urban office rents have been rising relative to suburban office rents much than urban housing prices have been rising relative to suburban, which is well known. It is all about creating the kind of lively, walkable, cool, mixed use fun, I can't say that enough, places that attract these folks. These are the same qualities that attract the housing market, period. So there's a fundamental synergy. The housing market is there. Basically, if you can create roughly 1,000 housing units within a 5-minute walk, that's sort of mid-rise to low-rise housing. You don't need towers to do that by any means. You can bring a block of Main Street to life. Not because that's all the income those retailers need, but it's enough to attract them. But we do a lot of work in working with on the private side with developers and actually communities too, seeking to develop new higher density mixed use walkable centers and suburbs for all these reasons. And I found it fascinating. When it comes time to talk to somebody about recruiting retailers, the first question they have is how many housing units do you have? Not how many jobs, that's how many housing units. If you don't have maybe 800, preferably 1,000, they basically say somebody's going to outbid you for that retail. I think I'll go work elsewhere. So it's just sort of a broad indicator. Next, please. So on top of demographics and our economy as if enough weren't changing. But again, these changes to me are about opportunity, not threat. Is what's happening around technology. And I'm going to say, obviously, I'm going to talk about climate change. There are a lot of other issues, but it is actually, these are the big three that are reshaping our communities right now. So let's dive into technology. Next, please. And a lot of this, I'm sure you are well aware of, but as you all know, something called the internet and Amazon have been out competing mass retail, big box retail. And in fact, if you look at where this competition has been most successful, the less experiential, the greater the impact. Meaning that last year, and this is US, but I suspect it's very similar in Canada, literally 50% of all retail leases were for restaurants or something place serving food. Could be coffee, sometimes beer. Not by dollar volume, not by square footage, but just sheer number of leases, and there's a message there. It is, and the retail that is succeeding today is the retail that offers experience. Food is the best way to do it. You know, a terrific storekeeper who really knows his clients matters too. Cool, unique, chef-owned, owner-operated, all matters. What is most important is the one area of retail that is growing locally, that's place-based, is retail supported by housing. We just finished a downtown master plan for Memphis, Tennessee. Worked with a person I think is the best retail consultant in the US, Larissa Ortiz. And the bottom line comment in her very thick volume was, if you want more housing more retail downtown, it's all about housing, and it's all about locating it, that housing within 5 minutes of where you want that retail to be. There's a you know, these are all rules of thumb, but there's a very strong sort of indicator. Next, please. Something else that's happening that's worth thinking about. This is a tough message to talk about. Think of our economic growth as coming in knowledge industries. Knowledge industries pay for education. They pay, well, it's a marker for other things they're looking for. So those of us who are lucky enough, and us doesn't mean I'm part of us, it's just a big us, who are, you know, can compete for jobs at Google and in knowledge industries, are seeing our incomes rise quite rapidly. For many of us, probably a large majority of us, our real incomes are not much higher than they were in 1970. That's pretty much across North America, actually. And it is, the middle class has a much smaller share, a shrinking share of total wealth. And how do I say it? Wealthier folks are much more likely to go to a cool restaurant nearby in terms of where they spend their retail dollars. Mass market retail depends on the wealth held by the middle class, and that's shrinking. So once again, future of retail, and it is retail more than anything else that brings stream to life. You know, people talk about well, I'm going to get to walkability, but just remember, having a place to walk to is probably far more powerful than wonderful trees and a brick sidewalk. Okay. Next, please, or a nice sidewalk. So now we come to what is probably, I like to call it the great disruptor, but again, a real source of opportunity for places that can claim the kind of urbanness that will support it. And this is not cities by any means. A lot of the work, again, we're doing in this area is also in suburban environments. And it has to do with the fact that over the next 20 years, and we're already experiencing this, we're going to see dramatic changes in mobility. The world will not be about owning your own car and driving 30 miles to work 25 years from now. It will be a very different world in terms of mobility with profound implications. I actually, this is me personally, think the impact here will be greater than the impact of access to universal auto ownership following World War II. And look what that did and what it did for creating Richmond Hill. So I won't go through these slides. I'm going to be more targeted in a minute, but one of the things to point out, longer term implications. By the time when Richmond Hill is having this meeting in 2042, you will not be thinking about big wide streets. They will mean nothing because automated and connected and autonomous vehicle, look at the lower left diagram here, where I have my cursor, or you can't see my cursor, require much less street right-of-way. We probably have as much street right-of-way today as we are ever going to need. But next, please. There's something else happening. This is a Tesla. I wish I could afford one. They're lots of fun, but this is not the future of mobility, even if it can drive you around now. Next, please. This cute little guy is much closer, because what is much more likely to be the case as we move into the era of autonomous mobility is that areas that have the density of people and destinations will be places where autonomous mobility becomes the mode. It'll be a click, something will pick you up, all kinds of algorithms that know who it's picked up and how to get them to places quickly. It'll be a very individual experience when you're in them, not like riding in an Uber pool today, for example. And it will also cost you about half as much per year in terms of what you spend on mobility. So it will become a subsidy of $5,000 to $6,000 US for living in a place with the kinds of density that can support shared as opposed to personally owned autonomy, mobility. And frankly, this is particularly appealing. Come back to that talent I was talking about. I think that will probably be what spurs communities to begin this route, is their competition for talent. But next, please. And again, we'll open to questions. I love this. This is a quote about Mary Barra from Forbes magazine as to why General Motors chose Mary Barra to be their new president. And basically that she was going to lead it as it raced to adjust to a rapidly approaching future of shared electric autonomous vehicles. This is sort of meant as a little third-party affirmation of where the automobile industry, where that industry is going, where mobility is going. Next, please. But something else is happening a lot sooner. And this is something that will work very much to Richmond Hill's advantage as you begin to respond to some of the things forces I've talked about, challenges and opportunities, should you choose. And that is that by the early 2030s, my good Stantec has a very large, very big, robust mobility innovation, smart mobility group. So a lot of my information I get from them. But basically, something I hadn't been thinking about until fairly recently, long before cars drive us around, we'll still be driving them, but they'll be connected to each other, constantly talking to each other. They can drive on narrower streets. They have many fewer accidents, et cetera. But they also will self-park. And if any of you were happen to watch, you probably, last thing, this is not audience I should ask this of, but if any of you decided to watch the US Super Bowl last year, you saw a Hyundai ad where two Hyundais parked 6 inches from each other because they parked themselves. Folks got out of the car, they parked themselves. So what's next, please? What is going to be happening is that over the next, starting probably 6, 7, 8 years from now, and very much will be the norm, let's say 12 years from now, is that every parking facility, every parking lot we built is going to be able to accommodate more cars, because we can park much closer to each other. In fact, pretty soon, we'll come up to the entrance of a parking structure, get out and say to our car, please excuse us, go park yourself. It will, and much more compactly than we did, in all kinds of ways. So we are beginning, what this is going to do is one of the biggest inhibitors to densifying many communities, adding the critical mass of housing to bring streets to life and therefore attract jobs and workforce and all those great things, required expensive structured parking. It was competing with surface parking, not that far away. As the need to provide parking begins to drop, as development can use the parking already developed in 2020 and 24 and 25 to add significantly more square feet, the cost premium attached with the more urban development models that I'm obviously talking about will decrease. And probably its value go up because of the convenience it's added. So this is the Kanata North Business Park in Ottawa. I find it just fascinating. Its job in life is to make a transition from being frankly, a suburban office park as a form in which it has thrived. Times move on to, and next please. And we're just this is very much vision planning, and we're just getting it started, so no particularly great graphics to show you. But their job in life is to transition from being a suburban office park to an innovation district that is walkable. That more than anything else has, if you see these brown circles with purple sort of squares in the middle inside larger blue squares, has nodes centered around a walkable square with a compact critical mass of development that really supports life around that square, life along Leggett Avenue, the sort of the main street of Kanata North. Quick access to coffee and beer, quick access to each other. One of the most interesting aspects of working with the folks in Kanata North during this extraordinary period that we all share, the pandemic, has been to understand how that has and has not changed the way these folks work. And what's very interesting, they're finding their employees who are largely working from home, like most of us, except for Counselor who's in his seat here, are productive by most normal measures. Their innovation productivity, and how they measure it, I'm not sure, but boy, do they talk a lot about it, is down 54%. Because it's the creative collisions, the unplanned conversations, these suddenly, oh, I have an idea. I'm gonna jump in, run next door and talk to my colleague who does something else. Having a cup of coffee with somebody, you suddenly discover that you're both thinking about the same problem from different perspectives. These are what nurture innovation more than anything. And so particularly important to these companies is to have these places where these sort of natural creative collisions can happen. Now, if you have to jump in a car from your office to go get a cup of coffee, that pretty much kills the deal. So what Kanata North is very interested in doing, and what is fully achievable today, is to look at over the next 2 or 3 years, more like 2, putting in an automated shuttle pilot that will connect. You can't have density everywhere. There just isn't enough to spread around. You can't have retail everywhere. There's not enough market. I should have said. So the compact critical mass in these circles around those purple squares is to make sure there are enough people, particularly living. Kanata North, it sees its future as an innovation district as much in the housing as it can attract as in the innovation employers it can attract, because attracting that housing attracts talent, talent attracts jobs and investment once again, and it is housing, a couple thousand units of housing within a 5-minute walk of each of those sort of purple squares that can really bring them to life. So the purpose of the automated shuttle is so as soon as these begin to develop, somebody who's parked in her office someplace can just jump on this shuttle within a couple minutes, be in the middle of life, fun, vitality, coffee, beer, each other, etc. Or let's say you have an idea and want to go talk to a colleague a mile away someplace else in the park. You don't have to go get in your car, drive over, park, get out again, etc. You just press a button, jump on one of these, go there. You certainly, if you still have to drive to Kanata North, you will park once and everything else will be without having to depend on a car. Very interesting. The International Downtown Association, which we're very active in, measures a lot what kinds of downtowns and urban places do innovation workers want to live. And they found the actual most visible common thread is places where you don't have to depend on a car. They may still want a car, but they don't want to use it very often. If a place where you can walk and have other options for mobility is probably the single highest correlation with what attracts them. Next, please. And if any of you, again, want to ask questions, please do, because I'm racing along. Just because I'm talking fast doesn't mean I can't stop and listen. Okay. So then we get to the early 2040s. I know this sounds a little bit Jetson-esque, but it isn't. My good Stantec colleagues who are very real world about these things basically say that by the early 2040s, autonomous mobility will be the mainstream. Next, please. So one particular lesson here is that these folks, these cars, these vehicles don't park. So we will have moved beyond the era of parking, or certainly parking attached to a specific use. There will be some, I'm overstating here. But we certainly won't have to think about the cost of parking as we think about intensifying and densifying our walkable cores. So another benefit, which I like to call the amenity dividend. Most people think of their, when they think about how much they do or don't like where they live in terms of what they can walk to do, most people, despite what they say, don't walk 15 minutes, they walk about 5 minutes, about a quarter mile. So this is a study, this is Oklahoma City downtown, talking about why it has the ability to really thrive in this era. And here are a series of very cool districts, and each one, these are 5-minute circles, represents a kind of a reason to want to live, work, play in that area. Fast forward to the era of shared autonomous mobility. Next, please, a click, a very quick, high convenience, low cost trip. The entire core of Oklahoma City will be the amenity shed for people who live, work, and play. So you may live in the research park, hang out in the arts district, work in Automobile Alley, and each of them is a short click away, much less expensive to get back and forth to than if you had to own and drive a car today. And believe me, a much more attractive trip and a core much more attractive to the kind of talent that attracts jobs and investment. Next, please. So in other words, all this amenity will be someone's backyard. Next, please. So the other implication, I've really said this, is that in 2010, 2020, you built 1 million square feet of building. You'd probably need, that's that blue bar, more than 1 million square feet of parking. That's a mixed use building. 2020, we're much more aware of sharing parking. Housing uses it at night, office during the day. You can add some new development, that little orange piece, without building any more parking. As we get into the late 2020s, mid 2030s, that same 1 million square feet of parking will support 2 and then 3 million square feet of development. This makes sense. And I'm sorry for speaking in square feet here. It's just my natural mode. Divide it by 3 and you get square meters, I believe. All right. I'm sorry, by 10. Next, please. So finally, I just want to bring this together around climate change. It's a more subtle influencer of urban form, unless you live adjacent to rising seas. But it's still something that clearly we're all thinking about and want to take responsibility for. And next, please. And the point I really want to emphasize here is that all the things I've talked about are part of a more climate responsible, environmentally responsible set of policies. The ability to preserve this wonderful scene from Richmond Hill, I think this is Mill Pond, but I'm not sure, and be able to stand up and say you're doing what you can do for cleaner air and reduced climate change has more than anything else to do with creating much more compact development. The map to the left is the Toronto region, and basically it is the per capita greenhouse gas emissions. It's often called the carbon footprint, located by place. And frankly, if you, one's carbon footprint is inverse to density. The less the density, the more our emissions per capita, because we drive much more and our house is environmentally much more sort of expensive in many ways, meaning that all other policies are important, but the ability to grow in and up as opposed to out will make the biggest difference around our ability to have climate responsible policy and positions. Next, please. So I want to close, sorry, we'll get there eventually, with some observations. And these are based on experience. These are not data driven, but they've worked in the work we've done and observed. And I'm going to talk about 2 things. Thresholds for success. Many folks can believe and take very seriously things I've said. Many communities, some communities will be able to respond and others not. And I think those that don't will pay a real price, to be frank, and love to talk more about that. But let's start with thresholds for success. Next, please. Next, I'll just So it starts with leadership. One thing I love about your 2041 plan is you are going to be going out and, because of the times we are all in, having these conversations with your community. The woman who is smiling, laughing, is the mayor of Sandy Springs, Georgia. To be a little bit direct, the most politically conservative client I have ever had. And she chose, Sandy Hill is a very affluent suburb of Atlanta. She said, my community needs a heart. It needs a downtown. Now, she wasn't necessarily thinking of all the things I've said, although she came to embrace them. She wanted a heart for her community. And so we got the privilege of planning with her community and created a downtown. Sandy Springs today has a downtown of 7 million square feet, which they have chosen to call City Springs. When we started to work for them, the idea that Sandy Springs would name its heart City Springs was actually beyond my ability to project or imagine. And they did this very proudly. They even actually ended up using eminent domain to take some key land, which frankly was the biggest favor anybody ever did to the owner of that land, because it was so important, she came to see, to the future of Sandy Springs for all the reasons. And this is a very affluent, like Richmond Hill, also very well-educated community. Next, please. And then it's about engagement. None of you probably know this is, I grew up with a guy named Alfred E. Newman, not personally, but reading Mad Magazine. What Me Worry. This is back to Dublin, Ohio. Again, the most affluent suburb in Ohio, full of Class A office buildings, or what passed for Class A office buildings in these days, with all the parking mirrored in the mirrored glass, you can see. New city manager came in and said, this isn't our future. The most important step was to go out and tell a community that many of whom residents had bought houses because they thought living in or around a golf course was the future, about the ways the world had changed and how Dublin had to reposition itself for a future. So it was a very information-rich process that led to broad understanding. I think everybody in Dublin can quote the same numbers I just gave you, or their version of a couple of years ago, and then the essential political support to move forward. And I love the fact that you're in a position to get out, engage your community. Next, please. Partnerships. Now, partnerships can involve financial investment, but they can also invent finding shared values, shared goals, understanding that development that does something for the neighborhood district around it benefits itself in terms of value. One of the things I love to say, and I believe in, and I feel has been demonstrated, at least in my work and the work I've observed, is that a community that goes out and says, here's what I want, not in a prescriptive way, but in terms of goals and performance, finds that one of the rewards is the developers who respond are the developers who like working in that kind of environment, who like working in an environment where everybody builds and develops in a way that ultimately creates more value for their neighbors over time. They build communities, districts, not developments. So this is the heart of Dublin, Ohio. Now, Dublin did invest, not grant, invest a lot of money in this. It has paid back very rich dividends. Next, please. Shared parking is part of this. One of the really intriguing development models that came out in Dublin's new downtown of Bridge Park are buildings, frame over podium buildings, not very expensive, retail on the ground floor, a floor of office, and then 5 floors of housing. And that office has rented at much faster and at much higher rates than nearby new Class A office building. It's cool office. It attracts lots of, in educated communities like yours, a lot of folks want to start their own businesses. This is a great way to do that. They came and rented this space. It's had all kinds of benefits, but one of the benefits is that you added all the housing you need for the parking, office, and retail. It's a lot more than this development actually needs because people use different parking at different times. Paying attention to that saves a lot of money, particularly before parking needs decrease. Next, please. Preserving what you value. You have wonderful single-family neighborhoods. I understand one of the things to look at is that this picture, for all I know, could have accessory dwelling units in some of these houses, particularly if folks are older and would like to have a unit to help pay so they can stay there. And lets other folks' kids move into the neighborhood. But by and large, the character, charm of this neighborhood is something that people and you clearly value and should. And nothing about this would change one iota, given the things I've been talking about. You got to manage traffic, but that turns out not to be so hard. Next, please. Transformative planning, really putting planning to work. This is a large mall just outside of Boston. When it opened in the 1990s, that's not that long ago, this was a big sensation. This was a big box mall, Best Buy, Home Depot, etc. It has been losing business steadily. Next, please. It had a huge sea of parking around it. Less and less and less of those parking spaces are now needed. As the parking demand retreats, this new urban mixed-use walkable Boston neighborhood is replacing that parking. And believe me, this is now worth a lot more than those big box stores. Eden's Development, who bought this, is impatient for the others to finish their leases or go out of business, because this is the future. But this is not a development, this is a neighborhood. And I think it's very important to recognize that potential as we adapt to changing demographics. Next, please. So finally has arrived. I want to talk about some urban design principles, just things that I think are worth thinking about. These are not all inclusive. I'd love your thoughts, but you're going to hear mine to start with. What really matters to sort of get this right? And right is about creating economic opportunity, but it's about creating livability, and frankly, today, livability, fun, are economic development, and just creating a place people really love and want to live, and an increasingly diverse group of folks. So let's start. Next, please. It starts with walkability. This is a development I just love. We've worked on it for a couple of years now. It's in Newton, a suburb just outside of Massachusetts, probably second most affluent suburb around Boston, probably best educated. This was affectionately known as Marshall's Plaza, not with that much affection. Next, please. It's been transformed by a company called Northland, and we have the honor to do the planning, into Needham Street. This is a mixed-use, walkable, denser place. It is a new, in this case, the term used is village center, and has particular appeal. More than 1,000 units of housing, et cetera. What is particularly interesting is some neighbors challenged this. Newton is a town of, or suburb or town of city, actually 80,000 plus people. It went on a citywide ballot and it passed 2-1. And it passed 2-1, wasn't going to start that way because there were some great community conversations, including frankly a terrific mayor who went out and explained to people why this was Newton's future and why this would enhance, not threaten, the single family neighborhoods that entirely surround it. They've got a place to walk to now. Next, please. Connectivity. Now, we all know about physical connectivity. That's great and it's important. Boy, the fact that you're going to have a rapid transit stop is hugely important. Those two reddish orange vehicles are the autonomous shuttles that will be coming sooner rather than later. But just to place you, this is from a development we did at the edge of Charlotte. But what also matters, next please, is social, psychic, cultural connection. Sandy Springs created a performing arts center in City Springs. Now, I understand you have one too, and these things take a while to really fully take root and program, et cetera. This is, I think, defined as a success, but it's really defined as a success because Sandy Springs is also interested in being a regional downtown. And this has helped make City Springs the kind of psychic, social, cultural heart for not just Sandy Springs, but surrounding communities. So it's not just about live, work, shop. It's about live, work, shop, culture, arts, all the things that are part of our lives. Next, please. This is one of my favorite places. I had no role at all in planning it. I've taken certainly clients to look at it. Rockville Town Center, a suburb just north of Washington, D.C., faced many of the same issues I'm talking about. They were sort of visible in the Washington region probably sooner than most other places. Created Rockville Town Center literally right in the midst. This was on publicly owned land right in the midst. It was going to be a municipal center of Rockville Center. Next, please. what's probably most important, this big grand space is their new library. Now, it doesn't mean you need a new library or a new cultural arts center, but the idea of having civic places, of making these centers as you create walkable mixed-use nodes, places that speak to the full range of everybody's lives in the community really matters. And next, please. And that has a lot to do with creating a multi-layered, and I should say an inclusive public realm. And to me, multi-layered means it's a place that accommodates all the things we want to do in public, from sit and have a quiet conversation with a friend or play with a friend, to get together with a dozen friends when COVID is over. Next, please. To come together as a community. This is City Springs, and one of the cleverest things they did was create a town green, very consciously called that, on which there are quite a variety of performances that collectively invite the full spectrum of Sandy Springs to come together in its heart. Not being cute and green was not enough. Programming really matters. And next, please. And then finally, authenticity. And these are two examples I love. I did a lot of planning for a development called Water Street in Tampa, which is now 9 million square, or well, it will be 9 million square feet. Actually, this project, when I got involved, had 1.5 million square feet. We brought in a housing analyst who demonstrated to our client that there was a much more robust demand for urban housing and walkable, lively, amenity-rich places in Tampa than anyone had imagined. And the project grew to 5 million square feet. They then went out and bought more land. It's now 9. To me, one of the most important places about it, though, is this. If you see this guy doing a wheelie, he's doing it on a place that will be called Maker's Alley. This is about involving the living culture of Tampa Inn, the folks who make pottery, who make music, food, to come and make an art, make Water Street new every day. It will be finished at some point, and 20 years later, everybody will say, you know, that's not what we designed today. But it will always be current because of places like Maker's Alley. The photograph on the right, Belmar, parking structure built in the 80s. Suddenly people started to build housing and the other across the street. In the back of the parking garage was this great mixed-use development called Belmar. They hadn't expected housing to show up. It did. They took one day, 20 feet deep of this parking structure, finished it off at minimal expense, probably spent more on banners than finishes, put in a couple bathrooms, brought in artists to work and sell. 25,000 people on a Friday night now come to artist openings and then go eat in the restaurants in Belmar. But it is also made, Belmar was really cool when it was designed, but nothing can stay cool. It is the living, bringing the living culture in that has done that. And next, and just about finally, this is in Virginia, Reston, Virginia, where a friend and I, colleague and I co-edited a book called Suburban Remix about many of these trends. Came out 2 years ago. He was taking a walk with Robert E. Simon, who founded Reston. This was a revolutionary new suburb, townhouse, denser mixed-use suburb. And Robert E. Simon took him for a walk. They walked past this family. That's a statue of Robert E. Simon sitting on that bench. And the little girl in pink turned to her mother and said, "Look, Mom, that man just got out of his statue." I love that because this man's statue, his thinking, his creativity are part of the story of Reston. It's part of the authenticity. There are lots of ways to find authenticity. And then finally, next, please. This is Memphis, where we've been working. I mentioned downtown Memphis is a very big place. Parts of it are actually pretty suburban in character. They have a terrific pop-up retail program. Pop-up retail, these are shipping containers, very inexpensively refashioned into places to sell coffee and clothes that at very low rents they've leased out to folks who have ideas. And these ideas really bring a place to life. They enrich it. These are people who could never afford to start a business, but a pop-up capacity, and this is through a downtown partnership, not local city government, can really unlock a lot of creativity. that also brings everybody together in our increasingly diverse world. Next, please. And finally, you have places to be so proud of that are your history and therefore your authenticity. And then finally, and this is, I think, finally, next, please, your living culture, which should just be imbued in every piece of what you build as you go forward to 2041. I'm going to close with a summary slide. Next, please. So what I have attempted to do as a perspective, I hate visionary is a little uncomfortable, just somebody who's been around, is to say that there is, and I haven't been all encompassing, there's much more to a foundation, and you probably know much of it, but it's critical to start with a foundation. What are the demographics, the economic, technological, and environmental changes going on around us, and increasingly rapidly? How are they shaping our opportunities? How do they become tools? And then when we have built this foundation, then we can say, what do we really need to cross the threshold to success? And it is about leadership. It's leadership in engaging your whole community in what can sometimes be tough conversations. But I love to say, feelings may not be facts, but facts need to become feelings. You got a lot of folks out there who need to understand how the facts around their lives, the facts that will shape their lives, are changing, and the ways they can use this information. And then a new era of partnership that can take many forms with those who develop, but also organize and program in your community. Preserving what is valued is not just an important message. It is an important message, but it's important for folks to know that the places where change happens are generally the places they don't value as much. No one is talking about coming, or a few people, and tearing down somebody's single family house and replacing it with something. It is the parking lots of strip malls and older office parks and older industrial development, et cetera, that are where change occurs. And places certainly around transit. Obviously, there are times when the market does spur that change, but this is something a community can manage and control. And that it is about transformative planning. It's about putting the markets to work for you. And finally, what do you do with all this? Start with walkability, create connectivity, and I think it's great to have a transit stop, but also make sure that what you build and create anew over the next 20 years speaks to the heart of your full community and to every aspect of their lives. A public realm that is about all the things we want to do when we're not just sitting at home alone, and that place that actively invites people of different cultures, different backgrounds, different ages to come together. A place that offers a rich amenity of choices, and find your authenticity and build it. So I have talked to you now for a long time. I hope not too long. I look forward to your questions and comments and thoughts, and hopefully a chance to come back and answer more of them. Thank you.
No, thank you, sir.
Well, I hope you're not all beaten into submission here.
No. I think that our urban visionary was very interesting, and as we are all trying to work together to follow that process, through, just as you said, walking community, public realms, and things like that we need to keep dealing with. So at that point in time, it's, we want to make sure that we can get some questions in. And I do have Councillor Silovitz, Councillor West, Councillor Paulo, Councillor Munch.
Oh my gosh, well, good.
Okay, I'm going to get to all of you apparently. Okay, Councillor Silovitz, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thank you, David. That was exceptional. I really enjoyed that. It was so full of information and ideas that are so necessary as we do build our new community. Just a couple of things. I I would have loved to have seen more Canadian examples.
Yes.
Most of them were American. I would have loved to have seen, we've got such beautiful cities here in Canada and some truly remarkable public spaces. Kitchener-Waterloo is one of them, Barrie. I'm just thinking, inside my head here straight off. I would really love to have seen Vancouver and on the East Coast. We have so many places, Quebec City. I would like to have seen those as more comparative, more as a comparative to America. Even some European areas would have been lovely to see as well.
Sure.
That's just a comment.
Well, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
It's more than fair, and I don't want to start being defensive and say, gee, I just wish I had more time, because that's not fair at all. One reason that I actually have fewer Canadian examples than I wish I did is because when you're talking to the US, everyone sort of assumes, well, Canada has this figured out, but if we can do it. And you have terrific examples. I actually helped worked on was it Raillands in Toronto for CN years ago. And you know what? I will go back and look harder. Vancouver is a global model, certainly, and respond. So thank you.
Thank you. Yes, we have some remarkable spaces here.
Yes.
Community spaces, public spaces. Just a couple of questions through you, Mr. Mayor, to David. I'd like to know your thoughts on this. Richmond Hill is incredibly multicultural. We're one of the largest multicultural centers in Canada.
Yes.
Given that we have a lot of residents who live in multi-generational homes.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you envision that we move forward we move forward in Richmond Hill in this manner, but we also take into account, it's not just walkability, it's about accessibility as well. How do we take into account these multi-generational homes where you have grandparents living with parents, living with children, living with perhaps grandchildren as well? That plays a specific role, I believe, in what we envision for the future and what we build. Mm-hmm. And second to that, through you, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to also know, how do you envision, look, let me put that a different way. COVID has taught us something quite different. It has shown us that we maybe don't need giant office buildings anymore. What is the future of giant office buildings? Is office space? Because COVID has shown us that we are, as human beings, quite capable of working from home or working from satellites.
Yes.
So I'd like to know, just from your professional perspective, those 2 points: multi-generational homes and the future of office buildings.
Okay, I'm going to take the liberty of answering them in reverse. And partly out of guilt, because I actually meant to address that and skipped right past it in terms of the future of office. And I think it's actually fascinating from all regards. And obviously there's an awful lot we don't know, and we'll find out. But there are some things I think that there are vectors we can follow and get important glimpses of in what direction we should plan and start thinking. One is, and I did mention it quickly, that for the most important parts of our economy in terms of growth, creating net new jobs, economic growth in our GDP, et cetera, are industries linked to innovation. And for these, the creative collisions I've talked about really matter. So it's been fascinating to work with the good companies at Kanata North outside of Ottawa. They are interested very much in 2 things. One, getting as much of their workforce back as they can. And I think their workforce recognizes that not entirely. A good third of them probably would have said in surveys they'd prefer to work virtually, but 1/3 is lower than a lot of us are reporting, actually. But they are very interested in drawing them back. Therefore, even more interested in having Kanata North be as in a place-based way, a rich, fun, lively, a place you'd want to be at work. And also a place you'd want to live. So maybe if you did work virtually, you would be 5 or 10 minutes from your colleagues. You'd still go out and meet them for coffee, et cetera. It's a very interesting model. I'm learning a lot. I'm learning right there along with the rest of you here around this, but it's a very convincing model. Secondly, related to this, there's a lot of evidence. Now I can fall back on my comfort zone here. That demonstrates that folks who have been working remotely, who don't have kids, are even more interested in living in higher density, mixed use, walkable, amenitized, community rich places, because the community they don't have in the office, they want to find in other parts of their lives, including the ability to quickly run into colleagues. If you are living in a professional world where you and the 5 or 6 people you need to interact with the most all work for yourselves, it's a lot easier if you live within a 5 or 10 minute walk of each other and great places to go have coffee. Is this making sense?
Yes.
Okay. Now to your other question.
Oh, we need to move it up.
I'm sorry?
No, I'm just trying to alert the next person to with questions. That's all.
Okay. All right. I'll be very quick here. The issue of mobility. Well, first, I'll give you I'll answer a question you didn't ask, which I think this is what you're talking about around Richmond Hill in particular, is one reason why it is so valuable to have public places, parks, public realms, but not just parks, squares that are programmed to actively invite different kinds of people who are seeking different things in public space to come and use it together. I did a parks and public realm plan for the city of Miami years ago. And I'm going to do some terrible stereotyping now, but just for headlines. The Latinx community loved to come and have great playgrounds in parks and use them for all kinds of reasons. The white community tended to go to their backyards to have barbecues, et cetera, but they sent their kids there for programs and got together every once in a while. And the African-American community loved to use the sidewalk outside their house, the corners to play chess, et cetera. But boy, did their kids in particular love sports programs. Everybody loved pools and spray fountains. We had to think of ways, because boy, is turning diversity into community in Miami a hugely important issue, of rethinking about at a programming level, how do you actively invite all these different lifestyles to come and use this place at the same time and get to know each other? So that's not the question you asked. In terms of mobility, there aren't a lot of easy answers, because the lower the density, the harder it is to be able to afford to provide transit, although it is so essential. Obviously there are all kinds of nonprofits and other programs geared to folks like this, but I think you're asking a broader question. But as we move into an autonomous era, this is going to sound very cruel, and particularly if anybody here drives for a living, but when you pull the driver out of, whether it's a Lyft or a bus, for some reason it doesn't scale, it stays the same. You basically pull about 40% or more of the operating cost out of that vehicle, and therefore cut the cost of the trip roughly in half. And therefore you have much smaller vehicles, you can serve much more complex routes. You can run up and down suburban streets with what looks like a car and serve people who can also just click when they need it. Is this making sense? This is going to give people a freedom in their lives that they don't have right now. Is this getting at your question?
Yes, thank you very much. I really appreciate that. It is about being visionary, and I guess we all have to project that forward, but it's kind of difficult sometimes in the moment.
But it's also important.
Oh, no. We need to move on to the next.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. We're now over minutes here, and there's.
I'll just be quicker. Apologize. Okay.
That works. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm done.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor West.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, David. That was fascinating. And I've certainly learned a lot. I'm glad that we had you here to go over some of this stuff. I will start off by saying one of the things that I've learned in your presentation, and you said it several times, and I actually wrote this down before your presentation, but I think that I'd like staff to add to one of the 4 things that you heard, a 5th thing, and that is that we need to protect the spaces that are valuable to Richmond Hill. And I think that was missing in the little brief presentation that we heard at the beginning. So staff, I'd really appreciate it if you could add that, because we certainly heard that today. Just in no particular order, just going with some of the notes that I heard. Can you talk to us a little bit about, with AI and autonomous vehicles and all the things that you talked about, what does that mean for traditional transit systems? Like in Richmond Hill, we're just completing a bus rapid transit system, and hopefully at some point in the future we'll get a subway stop at the south end of the city. Yeah. What does that mean for transit?
Okay, and I'm going to try and speak in headlines in deference to the mayor's move on here. First of all, for Kanata North, one of the most important things that this autonomous shuttle can do is connect, it may be 10 years off, hopefully less, to a planned LRT, the nearest planned LRT stop. Despite Kanata North's tremendous economic importance, there is no transit service there. And the idea is that as this vehicle shows up, enough people click to say we're getting off here, and enough vehicles come to pick them all up, they get off on the vehicle and ride the last mile and a half into Kanata North. So clearly integrating makes sense. Secondly, I mentioned Oklahoma City. They have just introduced, are just introducing a BRT system. What they are already looking at is how they can basically transition that to an autonomous bus rapid transit system sooner rather than later, even maybe shifting some of those buses onto dedicated right-of-ways where they won't have to move in shared traffic. Now they have to deal with their union because this means no driver, but that means less expensive and therefore much more frequent service. Not only can you go more places, you can cut the wait times in half, basically, if you're able to reduce labor costs. And this is certainly going to be true of transit also. Probably the bottom line is to just make sure that and they naturally will do that, all these systems are talking to each other. I want to emphasize right from the start, autonomous vehicles do not mean the end of transit. Will be far more efficient to get people on a vehicle, to a train, on a train, off the train, onto a vehicle, than to try and take millions of people all around GTA on independent small vehicles everywhere they want to go. These are autonomous mobility is about short haul, transit about longer hauls. Is that going to be your question?
Yeah, no, it does. Thank you. And that was kind of what I expected you to say, but I think it's important that we hear that. Just another couple of quick things. I actually, I understand what Councillor Silovitz was saying, but I agree to some degree to that. But I also would suggest that I did appreciate some of the examples that I think you must have handpicked, because a lot of the places that you talked about, I am vaguely familiar with. And a lot of those places are suburban places that are going through a process of further urbanization, which is exactly what we're doing. I actually don't have a lot of use for examples of Manhattan or, big cities that were always big cities and are growing bigger, because that's not Richmond Hill. And I think that's important. So I just wanted to say that. But I do agree with you that having some Canadian examples was probably a good thing as well. I will say though that a lot of the examples of the places that I said wow to the most in some of the graphics that you showed us, it was interesting because there were not a ton of high buildings in that, and I think that's very interesting. I mean, obviously we are going to have some high buildings in Richmond Hill, but I think it's really important to notice that, the subtlety of the fact that a lot of those really dynamic places were not, like, you could see the top of the building in the graphic. It was, 6, 7, 8, whatever stories. And I think that's important. And, interestingly enough, I think we were on the right track in some respect in that regard with some of our secondary plans that, we aren't necessarily following at the moment, but I think the downtown secondary or the village core secondary plan had a lot of the elements that you're talking about. So I hope that, we can look at some of that going forward and salvage some of the ideas out of those plans. I also really appreciated the fact that, you're talking a lot about some of the related to built form, but not necessarily just built form ideas that come out of this, and having the built form facilitate gathering places, public realm, all those great places that people really like to be a part of, and cultural places. Because I think the conversation that I've had with residents over the years, everybody always starts by saying, well, I'm not opposed to development. And I think they genuinely mean that. What they're opposed to is development that isn't adding a great deal of value to a community. I mean, I think, I've said to a few times before, and I think this is true, that, we're not looking just for big here, we're looking for good. And, and bigger is going to be a part of good for sure. But I think we need to define, from a presentation like yours, where is the division line between, the right size and too big, and, and in different areas of town, what that is. And I guess that, maybe that encapsulates the whole official plan exercise that we're going through right now. But anyway, I do appreciate your the time that you've spent, Mr. Dixon. I think it's been very inspiring, and I hope that will be the same for all of us on council and staff as we move forward with this. So thank you.
Thank you. In the interest of time, I'm going to simply say I would agree with everything you said that I said. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. It's a David thing.
It's a David thing, yes.
Very, very good. Who else have? Councillor Lynch.
Good day. Thank you so much for the presentation. I've had the privilege of participating in 3 City Age events, and find them very, very, very exciting the last 5 years. So I want to say that. So I like the concept. Further to the other colleagues, one of the things that's interesting is the 15-minute city. Is that something that you've looked into at all?
Yes, and I think there are 15, sometimes called 20, but 15-minute cities. And I'd say if you thought in terms of 15-minute cities and 5-minute neighborhoods, that's a great way to look at it. Meaning the ability to get to lots of different places, particularly without having to get in your car and drive within 15 minutes. Generally under 20 minutes is a trip people don't think of as long. So if you can get from art to music to job to live to park to fun, etc., you feel like you're living in a pretty rich and amenitized and a place that's about you. Most people, however, when it comes to walking and what they really value, for instance, in terms of a walkable main street, cool restaurants, coffee, beer, don't want to go more than a quarter of a mile, or at least don't. So it's important to think at both scales. Is that fair?
Sure.
Is that enough of an answer, or do you want me to?
Yeah. I've so further along that same theme, when I look at Seattle, for example, that's transformed itself. When I look at Canada, what they've done in some of the arts communities just west of Kitchener, we have an arts community that's revitalized itself. We have areas around us that are focusing on getting internet and fiber speed, and they're lobbying successfully the province and others. And that is a real challenge for places like Richmond Hill that have a geographic center, that have really great amenities, and our competitiveness for the next generation and jobs and investment coming into our community is really, we have a very low industrial base here. So our subsidization relative back to the residential taxpayer that's on getting older on a fixed income is a concern. We truly want to be a complete community, or a competitive community for our residents. And do you find a split between the American and the Canadian cultures on that, or not so much?
I would say that the American culture is increasingly catching up with Canadian culture. America went the whole idea of Euclidean zoning, separated uses, et cetera, and the suburbanization it produced on our part, really created a mindset. But I would say increasingly that the idea, and I hope I got your question correctly, of a place that offers as many options for experience, for jobs, for ways to live, et cetera, and for kinds of people you're going to run into are places that people pay more to live in and are more interested in working in. Am I getting your question? Or am I missing it?
Yep. Yeah.
Can I add? I'm sorry. Can I add one thing that's been very interesting, and this has taken place over the last 10, 15 years. It used to be that diversity was a negative in the housing market. Folks wanted to live with folks who looked like them and had the same income. If you go out and do a focus group, and this is more US than Canadian, but I can't imagine it's true of Canadian. You'll find that a lot of folks it feels uncomfortable to live in a place where everybody looks like them today. It's not natural. It's not the way the world is. And that actually includes to economic diversity to an extent that I'm still surprised at, given how much of my life unfolded in terms of, what people wanted. You want to redevelop public housing today in a good urban center into mixed income housing where 40%, 50% of the folks are still low income? Not hard to do at all if the other 50% are market and workforce, for example. That's a profound change.
Fair enough. And do you find that in Canada, we have a larger municipal structure base relative to the United States? Is that changing?
I would say not necessarily larger. I would say more of you have confidence in government and look to government for leadership. What's interesting in the US has gone through the phase of, well, let's look into the private sector for leadership. And in some ways, the private sector provides excellent leadership. But when it comes to charting the future of a community and making sure there's enough of everything, the private sector, I think, now values the leadership the public sector can bring, if this makes sense, because that's how they can be assured that what they invest will be made more valuable by what their neighbor invests. Am I getting at your question?
Yes, sir.
That's a newer notion here. You are about Canada's about the community, we're about the individual. That's to just horribly silo everybody. But we come, I think, from those two, we're converging from those two directions. And I know that I've really just embarrassed myself by simplifying things that much. But.
Your presentation, I didn't get a copy of. Is it possible that I and maybe other members of council get a copy of the presentation?
Oh, I assume so. One of my good colleagues, planning department, Kelvin, sorry. Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah.
Okay.
It was for you, so yes.
Fair enough.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I believe the clerk did circulate a copy of the presentation earlier this morning. Well,
Really?
we'll certainly get you one, Councillor Munch, if you don't have it already.
It didn't come in my inbox, so.
No, I didn't do it.
So just FYI. So thank you so much for that. So when you're doing your presentation, are you American or Canadian?
American.
American. And how much time do you spend up in Canada?
I've worked in Edmonton, Vancouver, Toronto, Ottawa, London, Ontario. More of my work has certainly been, what's that? No.
Okay,
More has certainly been in the US.
Fair enough.
I do work for a Canadian company, which never ceases to, and my manager, the person who tells me what to do every morning, is Canadian. So, but
okay, yeah, fair enough. You answered my questions. Good job. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Now we have Councillor Chan and then Councillor DiPaolo, and that's all on our list. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, but I believe Deputy Mayor DiPaolo have his hands before me. So I'm happy if Deputy Mayor.
Okay, Councillor DiPaolo, go ahead.
Thank you. Oh, you're muted, sir. Oh, there you go. Okay.
Oh, go ahead, Councillor Chan.
Don't do this again, please.
I was reacting to something else, Mr. Mayor, on my phone. I wasn't reacting to what's transpiring. Okay, if Councillor Chan, if you don't mind, I just have my question just revolves around one thing. I'm very skeptical about the prediction that you got 75% autonomous vehicles by 2040. Our systems are set that it takes us 10 years to build a bridge in Elgin Mills. Our planning doesn't manifest till 10 or 15 years. That's bold, and maybe it's happening somewhere else. Like, is it actually happening? Is there a city right now that has an area where autonomous vehicles are being used?
There are certainly, yes, actually,
That's
there
bold,
are,
and maybe it's happening somewhere else. Like, is it
Well, let me just say, first of all, I have colleagues who can give you much more specific information than I can, and I'll get it from them. What I can tell you is that the technology is way ahead of the regulatory environment. So there are communities, Las Vegas, Boston, Edmonton, I believe, that have had, Pittsburgh, pilot programs on city streets in mixed traffic. And Uber has run one. I don't know who else has operated the others. We did we're literally looking in Kanata North about getting a pilot up and running in the next couple of years. Now, these are unique situations. However, the limiter at this point is not the technology. It is the regulatory environment, which is having a much tougher time dealing with all of this. Well, for obvious reasons. There are a lot of unknowns, a lot of risks, et cetera. And I think the incentive is going to be, this will probably happen in the US by state before it happens at a federal level. And with pressure from various cities and communities. Canada, I'm not quite sure if it'll have the provincial federal balance will work, because communities that have a robust shared autonomous vehicle network are going to be more competitive as places to live and work. And if you're the business community in Seattle, just like you're the business community running Kanata North, or in Boston, in my community, you're going probably to be the first ones who really push local government to accelerate this transition. I think it is going to be spotty. I would probably more safely, and don't say 2004, let's say early 2040s. And that was not 100%, but that is the point at which autonomous vehicles are the norm and traditional vehicles are the exception. And the advantage that not vantage, but virtue autonomous vehicles will have is they already, every time an autonomous vehicle makes a mistake, autonomous vehicles all around the world learn how to respond to that mistake because of AI, et cetera. So they are one of the communities advocating the most strongly are folks interested in safety, the blind community, people with hearing deficits, et cetera, because they can provide service to folks who have been isolated and safer service. We're much more forgiving of a person being responsible for an automobile accident than a vehicle, than a machine, or a computer. So they're very safe, even though people have concerns. So I'm afraid I'm giving you more of a scattered answer than I meant to, but what I would like to do, and I can get back to you through Kelvin and Sibel and Patrick, is just get you some real-time information on what communities in Canada, let's keep to Canada, are putting what kinds of programs in place right now. Would that be of use?
That would be great. Yeah, I think we really need to know. I think
I agree.
Being told this, but should we plan for it now?
Well, I would say
you don't need to answer that. I'm just putting it out there. That's where I'm coming from. But thank you for the rest of your presentation.
Okay.
It's not only fascinating and interesting. It's vital for us to understand this and incorporate it into our official plan here. It's about mixed uses now.
Yeah.
It's not about planning for industrial here, commercial here, and the residential over here. And the community center for every X number of people. It's so much more complex. And thank you, David, for your presentation. I hope it guides our staff, and I hope they're taking notes. Well, thank you.
Well, believe me, I'm learning as much from them as vice versa. But thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Chan, yes, here we are.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you very much, Mr. David Dixon. And maybe a couple of comments, and then I would like to ask some specific questions and seeking your input and comments. I have to say this is you use the word transformational or transformative planning. Like to me, I think this is really truly talking about the future opportunities. Conceptually, I find this is like the urban planning 101, 102, which is fascinating. So conceptually, I got it. I think the challenge for some of us are that there's a tension. You use the term preserving what we value for existing residents. Particularly, you're talking about generational and so on and so on, versus, or I shouldn't say versus, but try to cope with the new dynamics, the newer generation in terms of technological advance, the demographic shift, the increased using of technology. And I just wonder to what extent that you see when is the critical point of quote unquote readiness in view of that tension. Now, it may be never have a chance to really get everybody the same level, but what kind of suggestion you make based on the professional experience? How would one try to balance that particular preserving what we value, but maybe based on the different types of assumption on set of values versus this new upcoming and future vision?
Okay, I'm going to cheat a little bit by being very pragmatic for a minute. And this is one of the things that makes this easier. To the extent we're talking about single family neighborhoods, for example, which is a great deal, these are very fragmented developments, a very fragmented development pattern. Everybody owns her or his own lot or piece of property on which sits a house, etc. That house is generally worth far more than the land under it. In Vancouver, that process has reversed in some cases, and the land became worth more, and then all kinds of change can happen, but that's very unusual. So long story short, compare that with a mall, a large surface parking lot, a large older industrial site or series of industrial sites that have lost value, have a couple of owners, large pieces of land. That's where change takes root. Where it really works best is where it takes root close enough so the folks who live on that block of single family houses can have a better life, a new place to go and buy ice cream, coffee, or beer, a new park to go and hang out with their friends, etc. Depending on who they are or what they want. So in the way that the system works in Dublin, one of the strongest opponents to the new downtown was the chairman of the planning commission, who all of a sudden one day said, all right, I changed my mind because I realized my kids and I can get on our bikes and ride from our wonderful single family house to Bridge Park and get ice cream. And when she connected that with her life and how it made her life better without changing her life, if that makes sense, then the light bulb went off and she was ready for change. Is this making sense? Is this
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, Mr. Dixon, ready for change. I think that's a very critical term you just mentioned.
Yeah.
And I appreciate you show us in the Dublin, Ohio, and they talk about the time, I believe you say a year, if I remember correctly, to engage the public. I don't know what specific time, but engage public.
Yeah.
So perhaps you can help to enlighten me or maybe us. Now, was that kind of intensive engagement to help educate or re-educate, if that's a term, of the community about shifting or adapting to the change, new reality, the new pragmatic situation? Was that done prior to the community intensive engagement before the city make any dramatic transformative changes in terms of, let's say, with height of density and so on? Which comes first? That's my question.
Okay, the egg came before the chicken, very much so, yes. With the engagement first. And let me tell you, what if I can express this, what was really important was for people not just to understand this, they needed to want it on their terms. They needed to say, I'm going to support somebody who commits city funds to invest in that. I'm going to trust that I won't get a lot of traffic, but my kids will now want to live in Dublin. One of the biggest surprises I got was when I got a ride from a Uber driver to the airport. And he was a software developer, and this was his gig. And he had some friends who had moved to Dublin. And he said, I never knew Dublin was cool. Now, their parents live there. And the other thing he said is their parents love the fact that they decided to, there was something in it for them. Does this make sense? And I think there's a wide variety of that. And it's important to engage people enough so they can bring out what matters to them and find ways to respond to it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you. Very quickly, Mr. Mayor and Mr. Dixon, thanks for your response. Actually, you mentioned about Vancouver. I'm sure that you and your Canadian partners, if you look at Surrey, BC, which is a suburb of Vancouver, and also Burnaby, British Columbia. In Burnaby, they actually have the whole commercial and residential mix just right around the metro center, as they call it. And also in Surrey, they actually have right by they don't have subway, but right by the public transit, have such a, really big development in terms of supporting Simon Fraser University, the Institute of Higher Learning, and then with all those high tech, businesses, startups around it, and it really truly, how I put it, transformed the whole community. Even the city civic center, new library, everything become life. So that's something we do have some Canadian examples. We'll be interested to see that. If you and your partners might look into it. And I just want to end by saying that I, for one, I'm very really enthused by what you present to us by looking to the future. And if I may call it that way, I truly, the takeaway would be like an ABC planning. A for ambitious, bold, courageous, building the community planning. It takes a lot of courage to do that. But I also think that the task was really try to communicate together with our residents, existing residents, to actually the kind of situation you're mentioning about, look beyond now and the future, and how we can engage partners, particular businesses, because I'm also very gung-ho on promoting economic development. And to that extent, that I like to see that potential, seeing the future, not today, what are the potential partnership opportunities you might have to do with engaging businesses to help, really helping to forge forward. Thank you for that, and look forward to more discussion. And thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I look forward to this transformative planning journey in the years to come. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Commissioner Kwan, we have our discussion questions answered. I've got next steps. Am I moving it? I don't know where you are. So there you are.
Mr. Mayor, you're correct. Thank you, David, for that very engaging discussion. Just like to now turn the floor over to Sibel to do the more routine stuff about next steps and where we go from here, and how we put all of this in perspective. And it's all going to be about, as David's mentioned, the public consultation piece, to get them have their buy-in as partners in the community plan that we're going to embark on. And it's really about the art of the possible. And through that conversation and the education and getting them, as David says, to want to have this vision and move forward in unison. So Sibel, if you could just talk about the next steps. Thank you.
Sure, if we could get the slide deck back up. Thank you. Good afternoon, members of the committee. It's a difficult job for me to speak after such a good presentation from David. So I'll try to keep it short because I know that we're close to the end of this meeting. So the first, if we could just go to the next slide. This slide provides you with a bit of a project overview. You'll recall in February, we provided you with a bit of a timeline on how we would be unfolding the work with respect to the official plan update. So this is a bit of an update to that timeline. The timing has shifted a little bit as a result of the COVID, let's be frank. And it's also very dependent on the region's work on their official plan. So in the blue, you'll see some of the milestones that the regional official plan is going through. And below that shows the phases of the work that we're doing. So obviously the first phase was really working on collecting background information, which we've been doing over the past year. And it also involves sort of defining the city's vision and considering changes to the urban structure. So this meeting is really helpful in terms of defining that vision. And we actually intend on having a subsequent meeting in January where we can do a bit of a deeper dive with respect to what the changes to the urban structure might be. And that's the foundational piece that will help us into the next phase, which we call the key directions report. And so we're hoping to kind of conclude phase one at the end of Q1 2021 and more take that deeper dive on that key directions report, which we would bring to council at the end of Q3 of 2021 for your endorsement. And then that really will set the foundation and framework for what we propose as draft amendments to the official plan, which we would bring back to council in its draft form in the beginning of Q2 of 2022, and that would follow the region's release of their draft official plan and even their adoption, so that we have a clear direction from the region in terms of how we conform to their official plan and how we respond to the what we've learned in our key directions report and how we're ensuring that we're achieving our vision. And the expectation then is that we adopt the official plan amendment before summer recess, and then that OPA will be sent to the region for its approval. If we could go to the next slide, please. So what we've identified here is our engagement events, and this is not terribly different than what you've seen from February. We're still intending on having official plan update committee meetings. So as I said, we'll have another one in January, subject to your approval, which would focus on the vision and urban structure. And we'll come back to you again with, our leanings with respect to the key recommendations, and similarly on what are the draft official plan changes. We're proposing 2 council meetings. So one would be that endorsement of the key directions report, and then obviously the final one where we would be recommending adoption of the OPA. We'll have 1 special council public meeting, and that would be once we have released the draft official plan amendment, and we'll give an opportunity for the public to provide their comments to you and to staff. And in support of these activities, we will have 3 open house sessions. So one of them would be the launch, which I'll talk about in the next slide. We'll have an open house with respect to the key directions report, and obviously a statutory open house for the draft OPA, which will give an opportunity for the public to ask questions and for staff to provide them with a lot more detailed information than they would be able to at the council public meeting. We also plan on having more specific workshops centered around some key areas within the city. So the Yonge and 16th KDA area, or the downtown, and the Oak Ridges Local Center, as well as some new growth areas that have been identified through work that we've done in support of the regional MTSA work. And also, in addition to those engagements with the public, there are a number of projects that are underway, which I'll mention in the next slide, that deal with more specific themes like transportation, like economic development and climate change. And we will be involved in those engagements to be able to inform those more thematic elements to the official plan. And then scattered throughout all of this, we will also have some more focused discussions with specific stakeholders and agencies as we move through the process. So that's sort of the high level description of our engagement that we intend on doing. And what you probably noticed was a fairly short time period. about a year and a half we have to work through all of this. So if we could go to the next slide, please. What this wheel is, you may remember this from our February meeting. This identifies the number of other projects that are underway at the same time as the work we're doing on the official plan update. Some of these projects will conclude before the official plan update amendment is brought to you for adoption, and others will continue afterwards. And what you see in blue are 3 new initiatives that we'll be doing that hadn't been identified in the previous wheel. So it's a pretty robust project that we're doing, but the beautiful thing about it is that we're knitting together all of these different initiatives and ensuring that they're all moving in line with each other to arrive at the same vision and achieve the same goals. But each one of them has their own specific focus, and the official plan kind of brings it all together. So as David Dixon mentioned, you know, we've picked a great time to be undertaking this work. And I don't know whether it was planned or just great luck, but all of these projects going on at the same time really do help to ensure that we are speaking from the same page when we're making our decisions once all of this work is completed. And the other expectation here is we're going to try and minimize consultation fatigue. So where we can partner up with each other on these different projects, we most certainly will, to minimize that consultation fatigue. If we could go to the next slide, please. So this is specifically with respect to the public launch. You'll recall we had planned to do a public launch in March of this year. And unfortunately, with the lockdown resulting from COVID, we weren't able to actually host the event. So our expectation now is, or our understanding is, the ability to have an in-person event is probably not likely for the next 6 months or so. So the intention here is that we will host a virtual event, and we've had a couple so far from at least the policy team's side. So we're learning from these experiences, and we're going to be working with our consultants, Laura, to provide for this event in an interactive manner. And David Dixon has promised that he will attend the meeting as well and provide keynote presentation. So I think that will really help to set a good framework or a basis of information for the community and help us to launch this event. In support of the virtual meeting, we'll also have an online survey. So that will be a way for people to provide their comments, in a little bit more of a structured fashion than just providing comments or submissions. And we also have an online tool that we're developing. We call it iHeart Richmond Hill. I think I'd mentioned it to you back in February as well. And that'll be a really great tool for identifying what we've talked about a couple of times now, which is those special places. We'll invite people to identify what is it that they love about Richmond Hill and why. And that will certainly help us to be able to pick out and highlight what people of Richmond Hill believe to be those special places. And maybe those are ones that we want to recreate elsewhere, or make sure that we provide policy direction to ensure that they continue to thrive in the city as we move forward in this 2041 planning environment. And I believe that's the end of my presentation. Oh, sorry, there's just one more slide. And that is, we've tentatively asked that we can use the January 19th meeting hold to reconvene this committee and really get into more of that developing of that 2041 vision and looking at what changes we should be considering for the urban structure, which, as I said, would sort of set the basis for the work that is still to come. And that is the end of my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
You're
Go
muted,
ahead.
Mr. Mayor.
Not now. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Thank you, Sybil. I don't really have any presentation or any, questions on the presentation. I do appreciate that update though, because I think it gives us a better idea of the timeline based on the delay that we've had with COVID. And it is good to know that we have been moving forward since the world changed in February or March. So I would be happy to move that or whatever is necessary at this time, Mr. Mayor, to give Sybil guidance and the rest of staff guidance on some of the things that she was talking about in her presentation.
Yep, we have a motion in here, the presentation. Staff regarding official plan including vision, urban structure and scope of.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
I apologize. I've been listening the whole time, and I just want to say that I want to thank the presenter.
Mm-hmm.
I've listened to all the comments from my colleagues, and I'm just wondering if at this point in time, given that we're in the middle of a pandemic, if this is really the right time to be saying that we have the foresight as to what the future is going to hold for our city. I think that given the changes, we're going to be in a situation where all of the different changes we have are going to look completely different than some of the research that we've looked at. So given that, I'm happy to move forward, but I don't know if we can have the amount of surety as to what we're going to be seeing is going to actually take place. I know that we're going to grow, but I think that the market demands are potentially going to be different than what we thought they would have been 6 months ago. So those are my only comments. I want to thank everyone presenting. A lot of hard work has gone into this, but the world has changed since we embarked upon this project. So at this point in time, Mr. Mayor, this is my only comments. Thank you so much.
Oh, okay. No, thank you. So we do have that is everything to next steps to be received. Just a question, if I may, too, as I'm trying to follow our interim here. Mr. Dixon, we went through a great presentation, and if I can use the Dublin, we want to look at that. We want to be in the same area, and as Councillor Barros just said, but I had the same notes that I had here on our urban vision that you were talking to, and what can be done. We are in the middle of the whole process, and I don't know, timing wise, it'll take us longer to get through. It will kind of make us sit back a bit, and just as Councillor West just said, where are we in all of this? So I just one last question to you, sir, if I may.
Am I interpreting the question rightly as, is this the time to plan or not, or did I?
Well, sure. If that's, yes, okay. That's my question.
All right. Okay. So my mind, I actually, and in full respect for the Councillor Barros's comments, probably draw the reverse conclusion. I think the fundamental trends that are shaping our communities are not changing, and that's visible. It will be really important for communities to be able to come out the gate as we move out of COVID with very clear direction for how they want to move forward. Flexibility really matters. We are going to learn a lot. It's probably, right now we're in the midst of a pandemic, and we've had 2008, we've had 9/11. I mean, periodically we have these shocks to our system, and we need to build in the ability to adapt and maybe to come out with less full certainty or a less prescriptive or prescriptive plan. But I think it's really terrific to engage people, to offer them the confidence that the community is moving forward and has a sense of direction. Is that fair?
Yep, that's fine. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Mr. Mayor, may I add something as well?
Sure. Yes, go
well,
ahead.
I understand that there's some hesitation. There's a lot of things that change afoot. And I think that's one of the good things about what we're doing here is it's an official plan update. We're not writing a whole new official plan. And we can revisit, in 5 years' time when maybe there'll be a little bit more understanding of how the world has or has not changed. So I think that we can embark on this work, recognizing that we're doing the best with the information that we have. And in 5 years' time, if we find that not everything was done perfectly right, there's that opportunity to come back and revisit and update yet again.
Oh, fair enough. No, I appreciate that too, just as where we go down the road here in what area. Okay, so Councillor West on the motion. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Dixon. Pleasure to have you with us here today. And motion to adjourn, please. I've got all hands on that. Thank you. Councillor West, we'll keep it in one name. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you all. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you, everyone. It's inspiring.
Yes, it was. Yes, sir. It was a